This is Rogers TV.
Hello and welcome to A Day in the Life. We're pleased that you can join us today for program number 108 in our series of conversations with famous Canadians. First, we want to extend thanks to our season sponsors, Bales and Dishaw Wealth Management. Kathy and Michelle have been so generous in supporting us for many years now, and we are very thankful. I also want to thank the sponsors of today's program, and those sponsors are our friends at Raytheon Elcan in Midland. Just a reminder that the next program in this series will be Ontario's Ombudsman, Paul Dubé. Well, I am very pleased to introduce our guest today, who is the Solicitor General for Ontario, the Member of Provincial Parliament for Dufferin-Caledon, Sylvia Jones. Welcome.
Well, thanks for having me, Fred.
Very grateful that you'll join us, Minister. And I want to just tell the audience who will think I'm being very informal that you have asked me to call you Sylvia, so I will do that. But I wanted people to know that I wasn't being impolite. Well, you come from this area, this Simcoe County area where this program emanates, although you're now in Orangeville as we do the program. Tell us about where you grew up.
Well, I grew up on a farm in Tay Township, very close to a little community called Vasey.
And your family had a family business in that area. Yep.
Mom and Dad had a farm, and actually one of my brothers has taken over the farm. So still have family connections in Midland, Penetanguishene area.
We're always interested in the influences on your life and why you became the person you are today. And I wonder if you could just tell us about the influence your parents had on your life.
Well, Dad was a municipal councillor for a period of time. I'd already got into the political business by that point, serving as a staffer. But both Mom and Dad installed in us as kids the importance of serving our communities. So they were both very involved in the church, in local farming organizations, Ontario Federation of Ag. It was just, I think Dad described it as, once you're at a comfortable place in your life, it is incumbent on you to serve your community.
Very good advice. I hope everybody who's watching this program hears that, because it's important advice. Your father was a good listener. I knew your father, and he passed away recently, and our sympathy on that. But he was an engaged listener, if you know what I mean by that.
Active listener, absolutely.
Active listener, yes. You grew up in a family with some siblings, and I think people will be fascinated by the makeup of your family.
Well, there was 9 of us, Mom and Dad, 7 kids, 6 brothers, and me.
So growing up with 6 boys, you would have had to fend for yourself, I would think.
Well, we had, I learned very quickly that I had to stand my ground, whether that was through verbal discussions or fighting for the last piece of pie, which I never got.
You told me a funny story about not knowing the meaning of the word leftover. Can you tell us that?
Yes, when my husband and I got together one night, he said, "Well, let's not make anything for dinner. Let's have leftovers." And I was, "What? What's a leftover?" Because we 9 people around the table. We didn't have leftovers at the Jones house.
6 boys.
Exactly.
For you. You grew up on a family farm. What influence did that have on your personal development?
You know, it's hard to say, Fred, because it is the only life that I knew. We were always really busy. Mm-hmm. So Mom was adamant that everybody should have swimming lessons. I was involved and had piano lessons for years growing up. All of the kids were involved in 4-H. through the church. I sang in the choir. They definitely knew how to keep us busy, and I liked that. It gave us an opportunity to see a lot of different people. You know, the one thing about growing up on a farm or in rural is unless you have a vehicle, you have to be able to go someplace to engage with others. So, yeah, it was nice.
What about your relationship with the outdoors world? Was that part of growing up on a farm? Being
Oh yes, yes. Mom and Dad kicked us out of the house a lot. There was always something to do work-wise on the farm, but the property actually has a river that goes through it, and we had a pond, so we would often skate on the pond in the winter, swim in the pond in the summer. Yeah, we spent a lot of our time outside.
Yeah, good for you. You did your primary and secondary school in the Tay Midland area. What were your interests going through school? How did they reflect in your development?
Well, in school, I was always very involved in the theater and in the bands. We had both a jazz band and a concert band, involved in both of those. I think I probably appeared in all of the productions that Midland Secondary School put on in my 5 years at MSS. I really have always enjoyed music, and so that was an opportunity for me to be social, but also do something that I very much enjoyed.
What role would the music and the drama play in your developing your speaking skills and your debating abilities?
Well, I think my six brothers probably had more development in the debating department, but you know, having to stand up and perform in front of an audience is a skill that a lot of people are uncomfortable with, and I'm sure that my early participation in those plays meant that I was more comfortable. Nobody's 100% comfortable with it, but like everything, you get better the more you do it.
Tell us about your post-secondary education.
Well, I went to London, Ontario, Fanshawe College for radio broadcasting.
Really? Really? What attracted you to radio broadcasting?
Oh, good question. Probably a little bit, again, the music. It was I was probably in a bit of a hurry in terms of I wanted to get out and experience life and get a job and do all of those things that we think we need to do when we're 20. But I very much enjoyed it. I was in the industry for not a long time, less than 10 years, but still enjoyed it and met some fascinating characters.
So when you graduated, now it's a 2-year program?
Yeah.
So you would have been 20-ish, I guess, early 20 when you graduated. What was your first job?
I went down to St. Catharines for an AM/FM radio station, and I worked in their sales and marketing for a year. And then ultimately moved up to Orangeville because there was a brand new radio station moving to town. And actually one of the visiting lecturers called me and she asked if I'd be interested in moving to Orangeville. It was a little closer to home, a little closer to Midland. And yeah, so and then I met my husband in Orangeville, and the rest, they say, is history.
Now tell us what were you in sales and marketing for that station?
Yeah.
And what does someone do in sales and marketing? Are you selling ads on the radio?
Yes. So you're putting together marketing campaigns and you're selling advertising spots, they call them. And a lot of it is really connecting with business owners and trying to establish with them what they are trying to accomplish in terms of their business goals. And then you put together a program and work out, what is the focus? What do they want to highlight in their business? What makes them unique? So you ask a lot of questions to try to figure out how you can best achieve their goals.
Mm-hmm. You would meet a lot of people in Orangeville doing that, wouldn't you?
I did meet a lot of people, and most of them were what you would call cold calling. So, not necessarily having a history or a background with them, but literally walking in and saying, hi, I'm Sylvia Jones, and I'd like to help you.
Yeah. You said you met your husband through that. Was he somebody you were selling to, or somebody you met up?
No, actually, I was part of a young business organization called JC's Junior Chamber, and so I met David through that organization, and he had just moved back to Orangeville. Orangeville is his hometown, and yeah, we clicked, and we're still together some 20 odd years later.
His family were very involved in the Orangeville community. I was told that by somebody that they had a long and significant role in the community.
Yeah, David's family also understands the value of giving back and engaging. It comes back to when and if you are able, whether that is, it was actually Governor General David Johnston who said whether you give the gift of your time, your talents, or your treasure, they are all important and needed in the community. And I've always remembered that.
Absolutely. Now, I understand that you met a woman who made a connection for you that led to your next career. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so also in that JC's organization, there was a lawyer who I had struck a relationship, a friendship with, and her partner had just been elected as the new member of provincial parliament for the area. And I guess she had heard me pontificating about some political issues that were happening in the community, and so I got a cold call on a Friday night asking if I would be interested in serving as his EA, executive assistant.
Yes. And was that something that appealed to you?
Oh, I had no idea what an EA did.
Oh, really?
So, not any idea. So I did what most of us do, and I called my dad, and Dad said, well, I'm not sure, but your cousin Judy, she is an executive assistant, so call her.
Oh, really? Now,
Yeah.
where was she working?
She was also working at Queen's Park for a Liberal member, as it turned out.
Right.
But, that was one of the things that Dad was always very good at. If he didn't know the answer, he was very good at connecting people together.
What a great skill. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Now, David Tilson stepped aside, surrendered his seat to a fairly famous Ontario politician.
Yes. So in 2002, David Tilson stepped aside, and that allowed then Premier Ernie Eves to secure a seat in, at that point it was called Dufferin, Peel, Wellington, Grey. And so I served with Ernie Eves.
Okay, so you were an executive assistant to Ernie as well?
Yeah, the titles change, but the role is the same, essentially.
You're a constituency assistant, or what do they call it?
Well, in the riding, they called me the chief of staff.
Oh, okay. Wow. Was that
for the riding?
Was that instead of a pay raise? Now, it's unusual for a member to step aside, although we've had it happen in our riding here. Garfield Dunlop stepped aside for Patrick Brown. But you had it happen again. Tell us about that.
So that's right. So after the Progressive Conservatives were defeated, then Ernie Eves stepped down as leader, and ultimately resigned his seat in, again, the riding of Dufferin, Peel, Wellington, Grey. And during the leadership race, when John Tory became the leader, he ran in a by-election in the riding. And I worked with John for a period of time.
So you had two leaders as your boss, one after the other.
Yes, I did. Yeah. Although John, I remember talking to John Tory one day about Ernie, because Ernie can be a very interesting character. He can call you very late at night because that's when he's thinking and has some spare time. And John was making some comment about, well, he knew that he wanted to talk to you because you knew the riding.
Yeah, that's right. Now, John works at the other end of the clock, doesn't he?
Yes, he does.
Early. Yeah, he was always the first person in Queen's Park every morning.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he's a 5:30 riser.
Yeah, he was a guest on our program quite a long time ago. He was still doing his radio program in Toronto, and typical of John, who's been a friend for 4 decades, he came to Midland and did his program on his Toronto radio station from the Midland radio station studios. So,
yeah.
Now, John played a role in your ultimate decision to seek election yourself, did he not?
He did. So he had announced that he was going to seek a seat in the city of Toronto. And as a result, I started to reach out to people who I felt would be good representatives of the area and ask if they would consider running for the nomination. I would be happy to help them. And when they turned me down, they often added the line, "And why aren't you doing it?"
Uh-huh.
Which led to I still remember, it was a parade, Christmas Santa Claus parade in Erin. And John and I walked for an hour in this parade, and I was telling him all the reasons why I wasn't going to run and I couldn't run. The kids were too young, timing was wrong, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then in January, other people started putting their name in, and I wasn't particularly keen on them. I didn't think that they were doing it for the right reasons. So what is that line? Then you have to make a decision. So then I threw my name in the hat.
So you first ran in the 2007 election?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep.
And tell us about your first campaign, because there were some novel aspects to it that our viewers would be interested in.
So I don't know if you remember the 2007 campaign, but it was a campaign centered around expanding funding for faith-based schools. Yes. And it very much became the focus of the campaign. And I still remember someone after my nomination. So my nomination was the largest that had ever been held in the province of Ontario at that point. There was 2,500 members who signed up. And someone said, now that you've won the nomination, you've done the hard part. Everything else, all the elections subsequently will be, easy peasy. And after that 2007 campaign, which was not a successful one, particularly for progressive conservative candidates across Ontario, I remember thinking, I want to talk to that guy who said that was going to be my easiest campaign.
That issue, there are people who said that John snatched defeat from the jaws of victory with that issue. I personally, my view is he would have been Premier of Ontario without that issue.
This is this beautiful balance about policy and explaining it to people. And when you go door to door canvassing, when you talk to people on the phone, you don't have 15 minutes to explain a policy item. They don't give you that amount of time. So if it is complicated, then you lose the narrative.
Yeah. Good comment. So you did succeed in the election, and you had some young people working with you as volunteers that gave your campaign a special feel. Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so every election campaign is unique, has its own stories, but the most recent one in 2018, we had a very strong core of young people, 25 and under, who love to go door to door canvassing. And as you can imagine, not everybody likes to canvass door to door and talk to strangers. So we ended up having renting this van, RV, and we would drive to a community in Dufferin-Caledon and we would canvass, and then we would inevitably end up having ice cream or a burger somewhere, and people would swap their funniest door-to-door campaign story.
That's good. That's fun. When you mention that, in the 1993 federal election, I did some door-to-door canvassing, and you'll remember the 1993 federal election was where the then Progressive Conservative Party went from a huge majority to 2 seats. And our local member lost that election. And I had my then 10-year-old daughter with me, and we had one constituent throw a beer bottle at us as we walked out the driveway. So you should get danger pay for doing door-to-door canvassing.
Well, it generally involves dogs. I remember that campaign because Jean Charest came to the riding, and I was a volunteer. I was young. I was nobody, but I had a World Wildlife Fund lapel pin on, and Jean came over to me and he immediately started talking about WWF and how one of their, I think it was their executive director at the time, was running for them. And he was so engaging.
Yeah, he's a charming guy. So just to recap, you won your 2007 election. You were reelected in 2011, reelected again in 2014, and then reelected in 2018, which is the election with the volunteers. And your plurality in that election, I think, merits some comment. You won by almost 30,000 votes, and the next closest candidate, according to what I read, had 11,300 votes. You got more than 50% of the vote. In Canadian politics, with the multiple parties and multiple candidates in each election, that doesn't happen very often in Ontario, does it?
No, but it was a lovely gesture on behalf of the people of Dufferin-Caledon. It does mean a lot because, as much as people like to believe that there are safe blue seats and safe red seats, the truth of the matter is that most of us work very hard to connect with our constituents and talk to our people.
Good for you. I want to talk about some of your positions during the early days. I researched and found that during the time that Tim Hudak was the leader of the party, you had critic responsibilities in, by my count, about 7 different areas: transportation, infrastructure, children and youth services, attorney general, government services, women's issues, and community and social services. You covered the territory.
You make me sound like I can't keep a job, Brad.
Well, it's very impressive that you would be up to speed on all of those positions. And I'm sure that would help you around the cabinet table today to know what some of the responsibilities were, because the critics do have to be very well informed on what's happening in the ministry.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, as much as I was not looking forward to 3 terms in opposition, it gave me an ability to understand the legislative process very well, right, and B, to your point, you get more of a depth in terms of you don't become an expert on one ministry, you have overview and the ability to reach out to experts, right? Because all of those committees and responsibilities, you end up talking to stakeholders and people in the industry.
Right. You also did something that I find unusual, although you may correct me, but you sponsored three private members' bills during that period of time that actually got passed into legislation. Private members' bills typically are things that die in the order paper. And I'd really be interested in exploring them with you because they're in three totally disparate areas. Your first was called the Social Assistance Statute Law Amendment Act. Can you tell our viewers what that was all about?
Yes, not a very exciting title. I got better at naming them, but it was basically there was some initiatives being done by the federal government that would allow family members who have adult children with developmental disabilities to set up a bank account, a bit of a savings option for them. And the federal government was actually putting some money into it as well. So there was a lot of motivation for people to want to do it. The problem was if your adult son or daughter was on Ontario disability, then it got clawed back immediately. So it completely defeated the point of setting it up. So if a mother told me about it, and then I put forward the private members bill, and ultimately it was adopted by the government of the day.
So the funds were no longer clawed back. Good, yeah. Good. Yeah. The second one is called the Aggregate Recycling Promotion Act. And I think I understand from those three words what it means, but perhaps you could elaborate.
Yes, so I spent 18 months studying the Aggregate Resource Act with actually another female member of the Progressive Conservative Caucus. We got quite the reputation of being the rock doctors. And I discovered that when we do buildings, when we take sidewalks up, when we repair our roads, they weren't reusing that aggregate. It was actually going into landfill. And I felt and still feel very strongly that it is an inert product and we should be crushing it and reusing it. Mm-hmm. It ensures that there is less garbage going to landfill, and probably as important, if we reuse, then we don't have to constantly be opening new pits and mining for new product.
Mm-hmm. And the third was something called Respecting Private Property Act. How did that come about?
So the riding, my riding in Dufferin-Caledon is, half of it is in the Greater Toronto area. So we get a lot of day visitors, which often we love, and we love to have them here for their dining and shopping pleasures. But it also meant that as we were promoting the Greenbelt, people were coming and they were driving on farmland that had winter wheat in it, but they looked at it and thought it was an empty field. Stories of people who were picnicking literally on the front lawns of people in Caledon.
Really?
So, yeah, it was crazy. So it was really trying to do a public campaign with some enforcement pieces in it that said, just because it looks like there's nobody there, there are repercussions. When you take down a fence because you've decided to drive your ATV through a farmer's field, there could be livestock there. They get onto the road, they get hurt. So that was the premise for that.
So all of these three acts really kind of grew out of your own riding and your own interaction with your constituents.
Very much so. One of the things that I think good MPPs do is listen. There's that famous line, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, use them accordingly. So the ideas came from listening to people's individual situations and how can I help?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. By 2015, you had been offered a fairly significant position in the party. This was the era when Patrick Brown was the leader, and you became a deputy leader of the Progressive Conservative Party in Ontario. What's involved in that position?
So a lot of it is an acknowledgement of the leadership within the caucus or the team. And the big difference between having a critic responsibility or being a deputy leader was what's the line? All other duties as assigned. So when the leader wasn't able to attend an event in another part of the province, then they would call on myself or the other deputy leader, Steve Clark.
So you would be on the road more than you would have been as a constituent politician then?
Yes, I used to joke that if the event didn't happen in Dufferin-Caledon, then I wasn't interested, but I had to change that when I became deputy leader.
Now, you would get to know the province well by doing that sort of thing too, which again would aid you in your current position in cabinet.
Yeah, it's always interesting to me to see how different communities react and respond to different issues. Mm-hmm. So that piece was interesting. Yeah.
Well, that brings us to 2018 and your first cabinet position. And what was that?
It was called Tourism, Culture, and Sport. I think I was the shortest serving minister in tourism, culture, and sport.
How long were you there?
From July until November.
Okay. What was your experience in that ministry?
I actually really loved it. To me, tourism, culture, and sport is an economic ministry, an economic driver. And I can't say enough for the staff who are working in those industries, so engaged and wanting their stakeholders, whether it's in the arts, sports, to succeed. So it was for a brand new minister of the Crown. It was a very, very positive experience for me as a first-time minister.
Now, you mentioned you weren't there long. Why was that?
Well, we all serve at the pleasure of the Premier, and in November, he decided that my skills could be better utilized over at a ministry called, at that point, Correctional Services and Public Safety.
Okay. Now, you switched ministers, didn't you, with the Michael Tabolo?
Yeah. That wasn't our deal. We didn't broker that deal. That was a decision that the Premier made.
Okay, it's unusual for ministers to sort of cross in the hall. So you became the Minister of Community Service and Correctional Services, and that then was, the name of it was changed. How did the change of name come about? Because it used to be called Solicitor General. I remember that years ago.
Yeah, so Solicitor General would be its historic roots. I remember when I went into the ministry, one of my staff was adamant that it should be changed to Solicitor General or returned to Solicitor General, and he constantly reminds me. I said, I have far more important things to worry about than what the name of the ministry is. Yes. And then, 3 or 4 months later, the Premier pulls me aside and says, I want to change the ministry back to its roots of Solicitor General. So I'm going to call you the General and we're going to change it.
So you're the General now.
So I'm the General now.
Okay. Now, I do want to talk about your role in that ministry. And I want to begin by saying that there are viewers who are saying, wait a minute, I don't remember her going to law school. How did she become the Solicitor General? So maybe you can put that myth to rest.
Yeah, so 2 things. The Attorney General is actually on the justice side, and the Solicitor General is on within the ministry, policing, firefighting. I have the Provincial Emergency Operations Center, so You will recall when the Ottawa flooding was happening a number of years ago, my ministry was front and center with that. Any evacuations that happen as a result of forest fires, my ministry is the lead on that. We have all of the jails and correctional facilities, probation and parole. And to soften the edges, I also have the Animal Welfare Act, so the kittens and puppies.
Perfect. Well, I would like to talk about some of those responsibilities and just what's involved in it, if we could do that. Let's begin with public security. What's the scope of your role in public security?
So if you think in terms of policing, and whether it's municipal police like the Toronto Police Service or the OPP directly falls within the ministry. Municipal police forces, of course, are the hiring responsibility of the local municipality. So imagine that as Solicitor General, we have the responsibility for the policies, procedures, the legislative piece, and the municipality has the hiring side of it.
Okay. And emergency management.
Mm-hmm.
What kinds of emergencies fall under that?
Be easier to say what doesn't. So, of course, COVID-19 began as a declaration of emergency, and that falls under Solicitor General. Flooding, evacuations, the famous Amber Alerts.
Yes.
When a young child is feared being missing. So those all fall under the Provincial Emergency Operations Center. And that's I think what probably the most unique part of the Solicitor General ministry is it is 100% operational. So it is a 24/7 ministry.
Right. And much of what the people who indirectly answer to you are doing is done 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Precisely.
Correction and detention centers. So there are federal jails and provincial jails, is that right?
That's right.
And you're responsible for the provincial jails?
Yeah, so there are 26 jails or institutions that are provincially mandated and regulated in Ontario. You, of course, have one in Penetang with Central North. So think in terms of anyone who is awaiting trial or is awaiting an appeal or is serving 2 years less a day would serve in a provincial institution.
Okay. And what's the scope of your ministry's responsibility? Everything?
Yeah, we are truly the employers of.
So you have to look after food and staff and
hiring of corrections officers, training, ongoing training. Yes.
Facilities, security in the institutions.
Yes, I remind people that unlike some other services that are provided in the province of Ontario, I have no waiting lists. If the judiciary says that you must serve your time in jail, then we need to find a place for you.
Yes. So you don't have any responsibility for who goes to jail, but you do have responsibility for getting them there and keeping them there.
Exactly.
Okay. Now you mentioned the OPP earlier, and in our local area, the OPP are the local police force. Where does your ministry plug into the OPP? For example, do you appoint the commissioner?
Yes, so the OPP commissioner is considered an order in council, so they are appointed by the cabinet. The OPP as an entity, as an operation in Ontario, again falls under the Solicitor General's purview.
Mm-hmm. And the Office of the Fire Marshal would also fall under your purview.
Yes.
And I'm just wondering, on an operational basis, how engaged does your ministry become in the day-to-day operations of these services?
So, the office of the fire marshal is somewhat unique. It is primarily an advice operations. However, it does actively engage when there is a fire that needs investigation. So, those specialized investigation skills come out of the fire marshal's office. And they would work with fire chiefs and fire departments to make sure that the training is continuing, is ongoing. They would often provide the training material. So it's really a part investigation organization and part assist and help fire departments and fire chiefs.
I wonder if we could talk about your role as a member of cabinet. And I know that there's cabinet secrecy, and I'm not going to pry into any sort of specifics, but I wonder if you could help our viewers understand what happens around the cabinet table.
Mm-hmm. So, because each of the cabinet ministers have roles and responsibilities that fall within their ministry, if they have a change, an idea, a legislative proposal, they would be the lead and they would bring that forward. And then there would be I like to call it frank and fulsome conversation about the pros and the cons, and a decision is made. Once the decision is made, then we as a cabinet endorse it as a team.
Mm-hmm. And how, and again, I don't know whether it's a fair question, but how forthcoming are people when you say a frank and fulsome discussion? Do people take issues with the proposals that are coming forward?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if I explain it that if I cannot defend the change that I want to make, then in a group of 30 people, then how can I defend it in 13.5 million people? Mm-hmm. So I think it is a really valuable process to present your ideas, defend your ideas, and know basically what the repercussions are. The best presentations don't just tell you all the good stuff about what this change will involve, but they will also tell you what the potential pitfalls are.
Right. Interesting. I'd like to look at your ministry with you for a moment. And again, just in procedural terms, obviously there is a whole bureaucracy of public servants who report through others to you, but ultimately to you. How difficult is it to get up to speed on a new ministry?
Well, I mean, when I went into Solicitor General, there is a mass of briefing books and information to read. Anybody who is considering any kind of public service who doesn't like to read, go elsewhere, because there is massive amounts. And then the briefings themselves, what I do is I read the material first, mm-hmm. And that allows the conversation, again, the defending, right? Explaining why you chose this option over that, why are you recommending this option over that. So I have a pretty consistent approach in how I do the briefings and get up to speed on things.
And at what point do you become involved in that process? I mean, there have to be a lot of things that there are just people who are, I'm sure you don't set the menu for each meal at the prison. So what distinguishes sort of the general operational level from the role that you play, from the stuff that gets brought to you?
Yeah, there tends to be multiple decision points along the way. So what will happen often is approaches will be suggested, and I will say no to that one. These two look promising. Go further. So as the decision points, and people often complain about the speed of government, but this is part of that due diligence.
Yes.
So there will be multiple times over the course of a legislative change or a regulatory change where I will be brought up to speed and say, okay, now we have some options.
Yeah.
Which is your preferred option?
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the more, how do I say, the bigger the decision point, the bigger the budget point, the more often those happen.
Right. And who reports to you? Is it just the deputy minister, or do the assistant deputy ministers speak directly to you? What's the chain of command?
Yeah, so ultimately in Solicitor General, there are two deputy ministers, one on the public safety and one on the corrections side. But in most cases, good leaders, right? They make sure that the people who are actually doing the work and preparing are part of the briefing. And having served there long enough now, I will often go direct to an ADM or other staff who I know are leading the file.
Good. And how far down the pecking order do you know people?
It depends what the issue is.
Yeah, interesting. I'm intrigued by the workings of government, and I wonder whether your lengthy term of service, and I mean, people who have worked on a line in a factory would say that somebody who's been in politics for 13 years isn't that, but in politics, that's a long time.
Mm.
Are there many people around the cabinet table with your experience in
Well, actually, there's one around the cabinet table who served with the last time we were in government, and in the same portfolio. So Ernie Hardeman is our Minister of Agriculture, and under the Mike Harris government, he was also Minister of Agriculture.
Right.
So it is, this is the important part of building a cabinet, building a caucus. Everybody doesn't have the same background. Everybody doesn't have the same experience. There are cabinet ministers who literally got into government and are serving as cabinet. And then there are those of us who toiled away in opposition for 10 years and are now in government and in cabinet. And to me, it's important to have that mix.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'll just tell you, it interests me when people go directly into the cabinet. And I've had a number of guests on this program who did that, probably prime among whom would be Bill Morneau, who went into a hugely complicated portfolio right off Bay Street. And that's a challenge. And a good friend of mine, Alan Rock, became the Attorney General and Minister of Justice in Canada when he was first elected. And that is, I think you've done it the right way. I think getting a sense of Parliament and a sense of the process is really important.
Yeah, I'm not sure I needed 3 terms of it in 10 years, but fair point.
Okay. I want to talk to you about some of your other interests too, because you talked about music and drama. Have you pursued those interests in later life?
Well, I did. This particular role that I am involved in now doesn't allow me to continue. But when I came to Orangeville, I joined the Sweet Adelines, which is a female barbershop organization club, and because it allowed me that creativity.
Right.
I like Dad, when I'm not reading all the briefing materials and emails, I do love to get stuck in a good book. So,
Good.
And my gardens have never looked better.
Well, I suspect that's the case. It was hard to buy gardening material this year with COVID, which reminds me, I wanted to ask you about your role in the pandemic preparedness and response. We see on television the Premier and at least 2 ministers. Are all of you engaged in that COVID issue on a daily basis?
To different levels and depending on where we're at. So I mentioned that when the declaration of emergency was made on March 17th, that comes through the Solicitor General. Unfortunately, I described it to some of my constituents as when there is bad news, I get to be up with the Premier, and then the other ministers get to share the good news. It's very much all of the emergency orders came through the ministry, so it was very, very busy and very intense for the first number of months. Now that we've transitioned into a Reopening Ontario Act, it's distributed a little more, but as you can imagine, it depends what your ministry is as to how busy you were during COVID, and continues.
Right. Do you get a lot of input from your constituents on policy issues?
I monitor my own emails, and I get on average 100 a day. So I don't personally respond to them, but I definitely read them. And yes, there is no lack of advice and good ideas sometimes.
I suspect so. What kind of comment are you getting from your writing is Caledon Dufferin? Is that what it's called?
That's right.
What kind of feedback are you getting from your constituents on the pandemic? There seems to be a tug and pull in Ontario right now between, do we do a hard close and get rid of this? And what does that do to the businesses? And I don't envy those of you who have to make decisions that affect lives one way or the other.
You're right. It is the full gamut. The other thing that makes my writing somewhat unique is that half of it is in the region of Peel, which historically and right now is in a very hot spot in terms of outbreaks. And the northern half of my writing is in a different health unit. So literally half the writing is dealing with different restrictions than the other. There's a lot of, look, people call their MPP because they have an idea or because they're frustrated. I describe it to my staff as don't get upset when someone raises their voice because you're probably the first live person they've been able to talk to.
Right. Yeah. Do you find you've seen the constituency office from two sides, and that's not the norm. Do you find that people understand the distinctions between municipal, provincial, and federal jurisdictions?
Generally, there is some confusion. I find that certain individuals believe if they don't get what they want at a municipal level, then I can override them at the provincial. And when I tell them at the provincial something they don't want to hear, they go to the federal. So there's a bit of that. But we try to be, helpful and explain. But yeah, and let's be honest, there are some programs that do jointly happen provincially and locally or federally and provincially. So, yeah, I'm not surprised that people get confused.
I was told a wonderful story by a great legendary Canadian politician named George Hees, who was a federal member in a downtown Toronto riding and later in a sort of a mid-eastern Ontario riding. And he got a phone call one day from a lady who said her cat was up a tree. And he said, now I could have told her that wasn't in the federal government jurisdiction. But instead of that, I went and got a ladder and I got the cat down. And he said, that woman worked for me and voted for me for the rest of her life. So he said, sometimes the jurisdictional divisions aren't necessarily to be upheld.
Absolutely.
I'm sure you have people that you help in your office who or you put them on the right track to federal or provincial or municipal sources.
Well, and frankly, that's the advantage of knowing the municipal leaders and having positive relationships. You can pick up the phone and call that mayor or call that councillor and say, I know this is your area. Can you help this person out? So, yeah, we do try to work collaboratively.
Are there ministries within the provincial government with which your Sol Gen ministry aligns? Do you work more closely with some ministers than others?
Absolutely. I mean, during COVID, of course, very closely with the Ministry of Health because they had the medical expertise and we had the enforcement side. But historically, I spend a lot of time working with the Attorney General because so much of what they do in that ministry has a downstream effect to our ministry.
Right. And your current Attorney General comes from our county here.
That's right. Doug Downey.
Yeah. Lives in Aurelia, and I think he represents a Barrie area, right?
Yeah, north of Barrie. But when he was appointed Attorney General, we immediately, I've known Doug for years, and we immediately said we have to have regular meetings so that we can make sure that the changes that you are making are positive for us and vice versa. And that has worked very well.
Right. And would you consult with one another before bringing legislation forward because of the impact it would have on the other ministry?
Absolutely.
Yeah. I'd like to ask you, we're just about out of time, and I want to ask you about your family. You mentioned your husband, David. Tell us about your kids. What are they up to?
So we have a daughter, Jamie, who's 18, and our son, Dawson, is 20, and they're both forging their pathway in post-secondary right now.
Good. And I think you told me that they can make for lively table conversation.
Yes, at the last campaign, I introduced them and I said, these are my two best debating sparring partners. They're very engaged, very informed, and they've always been able to freely and openly speak their mind.
And that's good. That's good. Does their free and open speech sometimes benefit you in crystallizing your thoughts on an issue?
It does, because I have to explain and defend. You know, I look at Dawson and Jamie and think, I wish I had that confidence when I was 18 and 20.
Yeah. Well, it is interesting how there are all these influences on politicians that we don't recognize. Well, we are at the end of our time. I really enjoyed this, and I'd like to just extend some thanks, and then I'll come back to thank you. But I do want to thank our viewers who faithfully watch our program. I hope you've enjoyed our program. Now, I want to thank the folks at Rogers TV who provide the technical support. So thanks to all of them for the role they play, and thanks to the people at the Midland Cultural Center. Although the MCC is closed, our employees are still working, and so thanks to them for their support and their promotion of this program. This program is made possible by sponsorship support from, on an annual basis, the Bales and Dishon Wealth Management firm. So we thank Kathy and Michelle for standing by us as they have. And I'd also like to thank the sponsors of this program, our friends at Raytheon Elcan, one of the major manufacturers in Midland. So thanks to them for their support. I want to thank you very much, Sylvia. It's been a pleasure to get to know you, and I've really enjoyed you. You've educated me, so thank you for that. I also want to just mention that because we're doing this virtually now, the MCC not being opened, we do welcome folks who enjoy this program to make a donation to the MCC to keep the wheels turning there. And I invite you to join me again next time when my guest will be Ontario's Ombudsman Paul Dubé. Thank you so much, Sylvia. Great to see you, and thanks to you, our viewers.
Thanks, Fred. Stay safe.
Thank you.